Turns out 5 yards was too much. This new one will cut your hand off if you let it. I feel like I'm working on a hospital gown. No. Yes. Hello everyone! Welcome to a series of videos where I will be making a cosplay of the villain Jobu Tupaki from the film Everything Everywhere All at Once. Or should I say, I have already made it. I initially made this costume for Halloween and filmed the whole process. She goes through a lot of looks throughout the film, but the one I chose to make is this one. If you haven't seen it, go now, pause this video, go watch that movie. As soon as I saw it in theaters, it immediately became my favorite film of all time, and now, since we've seen it receive all the accolades it deserves, so I hope you enjoy, and let's get started. Okay, after much printing and taping, I have most of the movedfabrics.com blackthorn coat and some pieces from the fennel coat. These are 2 free patterns from their website, which is awesome. I have, in particular, the 2 fronts laying here because I need to try to Frankenstein them together into the coat front that I want. I like the shape of this one and the set-in sleeve. I just need to steal, really, the shape of the neckline and the front from the fennel coat. So, hopefully, I can figure this out. Wish me luck. Once I got my Frankenstein pattern complete, I made a mock-up out of quilting cotton because I had several things to test out before trying to make this coat out of the rather expensive faux fur. First being the neckline that I talked about a second ago, the length of the coat overall, and adding pockets. There was no way I was going to make this thing without pockets. I needed to test out how high or low on the side seam the pockets should go, so this mock-up has pockets at 2 different heights to see which I liked better. Okay, here are all the final pattern pieces for the coat. There's really only 5. I don't know why I'm panicking so much about this going to be really difficult to sew other than the material, because like construction-wise, this is pretty darn simple. We've got the back, front, sleeve, pocket version 2, and the collar. And that's it. This just came in the mail today. This will be the lining for the fur coat. Just polyester. My first purchase from Mood Fabrics, actually. I just changed my rotary cutter blade, and oh my god. Watch this. This new one will cut your hand off if you let it. Montage time! Ooh la I feel like I'm working on a hospital gown. Okay, so 5 yards was way too much lining fabric, and will probably be too much of the fur also, but that's what the internet told me, and sure better than not having enough, I suppose. So give me some ideas for what to do with a ton of pastel blue lining fabric and faux fur. Well, the lining is all done, and it looks like either a lab coat or a hospital gown. It turns out that 5 yards of faux fur is extremely heavy, extremely cumbersome, and there was no chance of pre-washing it because the weight would have broken my washing machine. Oh my god. Okay, I think I've got most of it rolled up so that I have a manageable amount here. I thought I would try cutting out one of the smallest pieces first and see how tracing and cutting on this squishy, thick material goes. But I need to go back and check some of my source images to see the direction of the fur, if it's like this or like this. Because you can see all of the fur is going along the grain line. I'm trying to be as screen accurate as possible, so I'm going to go check. 3 pieces down, 3 to go on tracing on the fur, a couple things I've discovered in this tracing process. The first thing I noticed is that my pattern weights can't be too heavy. If you take a heavy pattern weight, it distorts the edge because it's squishing the fur down in one place. So the pattern weights have to be either really light, this is a juggling ball, or really dispersed in their weight. So this is actually working amazingly well. The other thing is I am so grateful that this pattern's on substantial paper instead of the typical tissue from a commercial pattern, because if I use my typical method of this with wax paper to leave a row of dots, there's no way. This is just too squishy. So I'm having to trace around the edge. I used a washable marker, and that's working out really nicely. Who's ready to cut faux fur? The internet has given me a couple suggestions on what to cut this stuff with, rather than scissors, rather than a rotary cutter, so as to make a minimal mess and be as accurate as possible. Not using those guys today. I have 3 ideas. I'm going to try all 3 and let you know what is best. First up, I have a box cutter. A video that I'll link below did specifically suggest using a box cutter. However, mine lives in the garage and has gotten a little rusty. I might break it off to a new blade and see if that is sharp enough. My next thought, which is one I'm kind of banking on, is an actual razor blade. Lastly, if that's just not substantial enough, I have my favorite multi-tool, has a knife on it. So we will see which cuts it the best. Yeah, no. Nope. Next. Hello? How hard do I have to press? Okay. We're striking out here. Please, please be careful with these. Hey! Look at that. Nice. I think if once I have a little more confidence, and when I'm through already, I can switch to the middle of the blade instead of the edge. Yeah, there we go.
6 hours later.
So it turns out, cutting with a razor blade is going way better than expected on the faux fur. I'm able to get surprisingly good precision. One thing I've learned is that for corners, it's best to cut towards the point from both directions. But I've already cut out the sleeves, and the gentle curve on both sides is coming out super nice. I really hope I'm not jinxing things by saying how well it's going right now. Cutting this fur is way easier and honestly less messy than the internet led me to believe it would be. So, razor blades. No scissors, no rotary cutters, but a sharp, static blade. Time-lapse time. You want to see something very satisfying? Okay, all the coat pieces are cut. Now, where am I gonna store all this? Okay, something I need to try to figure out is, if you look at the faux fur coat in the movie, they have this kind of seaming or stripe detail. My guess is it's meant to imitate the look of real fur coats that are using animals who, each one only has so much surface area of fur, whereas with faux fur, you can have as big a piece as you want without seams. I've looked all over the internet and I'm not seeing any tips on how to imitate that look. In fact, what I did find instead was some tips on how to hide the seams in your faux fur garments. So I'm just gonna test out if top stitching will work to create that striped effect. I feel like that's such a recognizable part of this coat, so I'm really hoping this works. It's not an exact science. Oh, my back hurts. That's enough for tonight. I'm officially done sewing stripes. I only ran out of bobbin thread and main thread 4 times. Tools you never thought you'd use in sewing. It's finally time to start sewing the outer layer of the coat. And I discovered that it's impossible to see the measurement markings on the machine's plate between all of the poof and the fluff. So I'm just going to mark onto the fabric 1/2 inch away from the edge. One of the resources that I link below suggests trimming the fur down in the seam allowance before you pin and sew. But what I found is that it's actually easier to just shove all of the fur towards the right sides, away from where you're putting the line of stitching, and then sew that way, because if you trim first and then try to pin, the thickness of the fur plus backing fabric is uneven because it'll be shorter where you've trimmed and thicker where you haven't trimmed. So I found it easier to just deal with the original thickness with the full length of fur, and then after sewing the seam, go back in and pull the fur that should be in the seam allowance portion out of the stitching, trim that, and then steam or press the seam allowance open so that it's as unbulky as I can get it. It's still bulky, but let me tell you, it's less bulky than it would have been if I hadn't given it a haircut and then pressed it a little bit. I added bias tape around the pockets because this lining fabric is really slippery and frays if you look at it the wrong way, and I wanted to make sure these pockets were durable. I plan on using them. I plan on putting my phone or maybe a bottle of ketchup if it'll fit in these pockets, so I need them to be functional and durable, and I'm hoping that preventing them from fraying and having one extra layer of protection from a true hole will help. So, I have one more shoulder seam, and then it'll be time to do what I have been dreading this whole project, setting the fur sleeves into the fur torso. I already dread setting sleeves, but setting sleeves in this giant fluffy faux fur is giving me anxiety. So, arm that's inside the coat is very warm, at least. Like, too warm.
2,000 years later.
I did it! I set a sleeve. Now to do it all over again one more time. Okay. The outside is done. It's starting to look like a real coat. Time to put the two together. Inside's done. Outside's done. Now, because the fur is way too thick to hem it on the sleeves or at the bottom, I'm just going to bag line the whole entire thing. We will find out shortly if this is actually going to work. This is like trying to pin something to an air mattress while it's in the process of inflating. It is almost 11 o'clock at night, but I am going to get this coat done tonight. Going to, because we got a lot of other costume to make. I had to put tape on my thumb because it's raw on the side from pulling these clips off as I'm sewing, and now of course it's covered in fuzz. I'm working on bag lining like one section at a time because the seams are so long that I don't have enough clips. The two things that are keeping me going are disco tunes and an air purifier. because it would have been best to pre-wash the fabric, of course, especially the faux fur because it's full of dust. I mean, it came straight from the warehouse and the factory where it was made. But that amount of faux fur, as you saw, would have broken my washing machine for sure. So it's kicking up a lot of dust. Also, everything is covered in fluff from the fur, just everywhere. I found that between the little bits of fuzz and dust, my lungs were starting to hurt. So I've been putting on the air purifier, and it's actually helped significantly. So if you're going to work with faux fur, and for whatever reason you don't have a way to pre-wash it ahead, definitely get some kind of air filter, or even wear a mask. It's very dusty. It'd be better for your health. The collar fits on perfectly. Who's good? / actually made a mock-up. Almost done getting the lining sewn in, and I realized the inside-out sleeves kind of look like sandworms. Just kidding, I cannot do the sleeves this way, because they come out like this. Does my brain comprehend what just happened here? No. Have I been working on this for way too long? Yes. Okay, you saw my first attempt at lining the sleeve hem and how poorly that went. So I had to turn to the internet for help. I'll link down below the video that helped me get right the sleeve plus the sleeve lining. What I have to do with them inside out is actually, instead of putting one inside the other, put them end to end. That video suggests taking the fashion fabric, the outer fabric, and flipping that up and then sliding the lining over it so that you can have the two raw edges facing the same direction. That works well enough for pinning, or rather clipping, but for sewing I found it way easier to do the reverse and have the fashion fabric on the outside and the lining fabric flipped up on the inside. Once that's all sewn and flipped right side out, it looks like this. Still kind of looks like a sandworm. Okay. Moment of truth. Flipping it right side out. So, it's fully bag lined now. The only thing left to do is close up the center back of the lining so that it can't be turned inside out anymore. The coat is done! I'm so happy with it. I'm so happy with how the stripes came out. And it has pockets! Where's the other one? I think it looks not necessarily homemade. I'm definitely going to use it outside of this costume because it is so warm. This thing weighs like at least a pound, maybe 2 pounds. If I were to do it again, or if I had more time, I would understitch the lining at least on the 2 front opening vertical seams, but I don't have time. And I would have invisibly slip-stitched the center back of the lining closed. I just whip-stitched it closed because 1, no one will ever see it, and 2, I am running out of time before Halloween, and I have to move on to the other parts of the costume. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope this was a fun ride. Try making a faux fur coat sometime. Or don't, now that you've seen what it takes. To be honest, I don't know what else. It's really soft. What was I saying? Just give me strength. Muppet sandworm?